Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you for another episode of podcasting greatness here on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and who knows what other platforms my podcast has drifted onto or infected, depending on how you might look at what I have to say these days. Anyway, welcome to the show. This week we're doing something pretty different, and I'm actually a little excited about it because I have a special guest. Her name is Erin Louis, and she has written a book called Expose Yourself. And she used to work in the sex industry as a stripper. And she wrote this book about her kind of experiences, life story, journey into skepticism and critical thinking, and how she has applied that in different parts of her life, and to this, and even to thoughts and ideas about the industry that she worked in from a critical standpoint. Because let's face it, there is all kinds of controversy, especially in the United States, surrounding the topic and subject of sex and the sex industry, the professional industry of this. And of course, the United States has a sort of, I don't know if it's accurate really to position it this way, but I'll say a sort of underlying Christian morality base that sort of rears its ugly head a little too often in terms of the ideas that this group of people believe that they can enforce on non-Christians or non-believers because they're right and everybody else is kind of wrong. And obviously, that's not all Christians. So let's not go too crazy with this. But this does exist in our culture, and it's existed from the beginning because this country was founded by people who were leaving religious situations for religious persecution and founding their own kind of religious extremist groups here. So it's kind of traditional in America to kind of have this happening. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to it. Erin, welcome to my show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, happy to. I found your book interesting. I admit it, I didn't finish it. I got up to about chapter 8 or so, and it was absolutely fascinating. I thought you did a great job with it. Was that the first time you've written things, or have you been doing stories or shorts or anything like that before that?
I actually have 2 books before that. My first book came out in 2015. And it is my memoir. It's called Dirty Money, Memoirs of a Stripper. And it basically starts from my childhood in Orange County, California, and goes up right until about 2014. And so it talks about how I got into the industry. A lot of funny stories because, if you can't laugh about dancing naked in front of strangers, what can you laugh about? So I try to really make it humorous. But also I wanted to tell a different narrative than the typical Dr. Phil narrative you got out there on talk shows about how everybody's, drug addicts and abused and, dating the, wannabe rock star on the couch, smoking pot all day and supporting him, that kind of stereotype. I really wanted to dispel that kind of thing. And then a couple of years after that, in 2018, I also published a smaller book, a shorter one, basically kind of the ins and outs of the industry, the way I saw it, things like stripper etiquette. I write a little bit about misogyny and how to take advantage of it and things like that. Some of the dirty parts, not dirty like sexual dirty more as in kind of gross, because gets kind of nasty sometimes. And then I've also published articles in Free Thought Today, FFRF's paper, and I'm also a contributing writer for Secular Nation, Atheist Alliance of America's newsletter. Well, so I've written some things.
Yeah, you have. That's actually great. Yeah. I love that. I should have gotten to your bio. So.
Oh. No worries.
No, that's actually really cool because sitting down and writing is not easy. And I've just always kind of done it. And ever since I was a kid, I was writing. Was that the case with you, or was it hard for you to get into it?
I've always loved to read. I had, you know, I've always loved books since I was very small. It was one of my first things. And of course, I grew up in the 80s. So, we had one TV. It was in like the den. Um, you had to fight your siblings for it. There was no remote, that kind of a thing. So books for me were a real big pastime. Um, and I found libraries fascinating. So I've always really loved books. I love to read. I like to write, but I was always very intimidated. I think because I read so much, I was really doubted my ability to write. So I wrote anyway, but I never really thought um, authors to me were like rock stars. So the thought of me actually doing that, it was the difference between seeing Madonna in my room with a hairbrush, as opposed to actually like thinking I'm going to be Madonna someday. So yeah, it was kind of a big step for me to actually think about publishing anything. But I've always wanted to write.
I totally hear you. We have very common history there. I used to practically live in the library all summer between school years, and they would even have reading competitions, or not. They didn't really think of it as competitions, but they'd have like lists of how many books the kids read, and everybody would sign up, and
Mhm.
I was gunning for number one. I actually would. I would push it hard, and I wouldn't just read pamphlets. I'd try to read real books, but it was always kind of fun doing that, and learning. Just reading is fun, but it's the learning. It's like learning all this fascinating information about the past, and other people's views on things. History was always a real big thing for me. I loved going and just perusing history books, even, and just like looking at all the pictures from, unfortunately, a lot of war coverage, but other history stuff too. So anyway, yeah, real cool stuff. And then moving up to actually writing and then publishing. I wish more people, could do it, because it's such an intimate and amazing way of sharing yourself with the rest of the world, in a way that you get to kind of craft the message too. You get to work it over a little bit, so it's not just, "Rah, rah, rah," and then, "Oh no, I didn't mean to say it quite that way." But good times. Now, how did you, let's just sort of walk through the story a little bit, just so people know who haven't seen your stuff. How did you get into and then out of the stripping industry?
Well, I graduated high school early. School wasn't particularly fun for me, which is why actually I really liked books also. They were kind of a bit of an escape. Um, so when I realized that I could graduate high school early, I did. So I actually moved out on my own right before I turned 18. I graduated right after I turned 16. And, I went to work at McDonald's and worked for a phone place. And I'm like, this is horrible. I don't like, I had a bit of an issue with authority. I was always very independent, and always was kind of a sexual being, was a little bit of an exhibitionist before I knew what that actually was. So I kind of, back then, before the internet, you got the newspaper and you looked at the want ads and answered an ad to be actually the first time was to be like a dancer for bachelor parties, which actually did not turn out well when you're short and pale and redheaded. Um, and then I finally answered the ad to be a topless waitress. Um, but that, of course, ended up being an into being a dancer. They give you an ultimatum about a week into it. So you go from an employee to being an independent contractor. Um, and I did that on and off for about 22 years. I actually just quit last August. So,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
And
basically, I didn't like being told what to do. Long story short.
I think there might be some degree. What do you think of this? You just mentioned that, and I suddenly think to myself, I think that's a little bit of a common thread we see with a lot of people in the skeptic community. Maybe it's
I
part
mean,
of it.
could be. You don't like to take people's word for it, I guess.
A little bit.
Um,
Yeah. Don't want to get pushed around with ideas any more than some people want to get pushed around physically. or beliefs. What was it about now that you've of course spent all these years working in that industry, and there's two things that I was immediately curious about, which is one, over the time you've been doing this, attitudes culturally have changed quite a bit in regards to sex and bodies and openness of both. Um, what have you noticed from inside that industry? Has it changed along with this? Have you noticed a change? Is this just me seeing it that way? What do you think about that?
I think it has become more acceptable. There isn't quite the ick factor
Hmm.
that there was when I first started dancing. I really felt when I first started at 18, 19, and those years, that it was something I really had to hide. And, you kind of played this double role. Um, but more recently, it really hasn't been that way. And people are much more accepting, even if they're only outwardly accepting, because it's cool. And then, you'll get the little stuff behind the back where everybody's like, to your face, they're like, "Oh, that's so awesome." And then, you see the Karens in the kitchen going, "Oh, ah, you know, hide your husbands." It's like, dude, I don't want your husband, trust me. Take my word for it, I'm cool. But yeah, I think there's been a little bit of a shift, I think, socially, where people, it's kind of it can be cool now, which is a good and a bad thing, I
Hmm.
think. Certainly, it's not something that I like to. I don't ever want people to think that I am recruiting or advocating for women or people in general to be in the sex industry, because it can be very, very difficult. There's a lot of predators in there. You have to really, really be aware, and you have to be very strong. And I think being a skeptic helps, because I've been told, I don't know how many times, I'm going to be, a model for a video game, or, come do this or come do that, or, come to my house, I'm safe, or, you get told a lot of crap, um, in the guise of trying to help you. And so being able to question things, being skeptical, critical thinking is really, really important. And so if you're somebody that's, willing to take candy from strangers without questioning it, it's not an industry to get into.
Yeah, I can imagine that's definitely true. What would you say? Oh, I mean, we're really bad at this, so I'm asking you for a percentage figure, but maybe uh, an estimate, or from looking at it over the time you've been in this, burnout. Like how many people get into this and then find out, have bad consequences. Let's put it that way. How,
Probably quite a lot. I
yeah.
would say maybe 60 or 70% even. A lot of it has to do with the drugs. A lot of it has to do with self-esteem issues. Um, we were talking about my YouTube channel. I did do a video of a reading from my second book that talks a little bit about, it talks about being rejected, and it talks about the burnout factor.
Hmm.
Um, it's very much a an emotional roller coaster, because, and I think that I've noticed this, there's some parallels with writing. But as a performer, you can have these real highs where you are just, on top of the world, and you're breaking it in, and everybody's just, you're just awesome. And the next night, it's the complete opposite. You're dirt, you're getting made fun of. Somebody's calling you, well, me in particular, flat chested. I had somebody call me fat. I had another guy tell me I was too skinny. I had, you know, I, you may just be standing in the corner, and for some reason it just doesn't happen to be your night. And that is extremely hard on your self esteem. Um, and then you also have the social aspect of it with the other performers. I mean, you have, 50 girls crammed into a dressing room, all competing for the same money. Um, and it can get a little tense. So
Really?
it's hard.
Is there a culture of competition That's
Oh
that's
yeah.
interesting. I mean, not being familiar with it, I gotta admit, right now, I've never been in a strip club.
Okay.
Okay,
I got it.
I
Yeah,
mean,
don't feel like the Lone Ranger. It's
yeah,
okay.
no, I'm just saying just to
Yeah.
kind of contextualize my experience with this. I am Mr. Naive on all of this, which is why I have so many questions for you. I was in, Scientology and the Sea Org. I was in the heart of Hollywood. So I was surrounded by strip clubs. We walked past them every night, but it was never going to be a thing that I was going to go in there, right? Because it was out ethics. It was grossly immoral as far as Scientology was concerned, which has a pretty 50s Leave It to Beaver kind of mentality, especially about sex. Then I'm reading, your material, and it's like, well, yeah, no, it's not just in Scientology. This is pretty pervasive, and we're just starting to overcome some of these old tropes and stereotypes and nonsense. But we have to also sort of balance that with the reality that this is a harsh industry where bad things happen all the time to good people or desperate people or people who have gotten to a point where they don't seem to feel like they have very many life choices, and there they are. But even that itself is a stereotype. You don't appear to be that. You've made something of yourself. You've moved on with books and writing and critical thinking, and you've survived the industry. So is it, clearly there's spectrums here, and this is not really something that gets a lot of microscopic look by a lot of people. That's why I jumped on the opportunity to have you on my show, because I thought it's about time. Let's dive into this. So what kind of what are true about the stereotypes and what are false as far as what you've seen and heard and your experience in the industry?
Uh, drugs is probably the biggest true stereotype, I would say. There's a lot of drugs involved. Personally, and alcohol, of course. Personally, I think a lot of that goes back to like the purity culture you were talking about. With personally, I was raised Catholic, sort of. I mean, I called bullshit fairly early, but I pretended to be Christian Catholic for a long time after that. Um, People are taught to be ashamed about sex and sexuality and their bodies and things like that. And I think a lot of times when they get into this industry, um, those types of chemicals, be it cocaine, helps you to get over shyness. Pain medicine is a big one now. So now you're talking about opiates, and then of course they move on to heroin if you can't get it anymore. And alcohol, especially, is probably a big one. So I think the drugs are probably the biggest accurate stereotype that I've seen. And sometimes that happens, maybe after somebody started, maybe they started like where I started dancing. I was really put in an ultimatum where I had been a waitress where I was getting tips and getting minimum wage. And, a week later, they're like, sign this contract. You're an independent contractor, which means I'm now paying them to work. And now all of a sudden, I'm not getting a paycheck. So being put in that position all of a sudden, you may need something to help you get through the night to pay your rent. So I think that's probably the biggest stereotype there. And it's one of the hardest ones to overcome. Like I said, naturally, I tend to be just a sexual person. I tend to be open. Even though my mother was raised really like hardcore Catholic, like nuns and all that stuff. She always taught me that there was nothing wrong with nudity and sexuality. She taught me to be safe. She taught me to, look around. I know it's weird, but it's the truth. And so I was never ashamed. That part of it it never was ashamed. It took me a while to be comfortable on stage and the performance part of it. But I really felt like if I started drinking or started doing something else to overcome that, it would only snowball and I would never actually really develop the stage presence or the confidence to be on stage and be a performer if I was always chemically enhanced. And that just happened to be that was my take on it. And that's really, I think a lot of what kept me safe. Didn't make me very popular because I was not invited to the Coke parties or, that kind of stuff. I did smoke a lot of pot, so that was a little different. But, I never did anything else. But yeah, like I said, not popular. And girls like me telling them that it's not a good idea to drink or do drugs at work also. So I'm still not popular.
Well, that makes complete sense. So you actually were able to maintain that position through all the years you were doing this. Yeah, yeah, that's surprising because the peer pressure on that would be intense.
Well, yeah, but you know what? I was never popular in school either. So I guess I was just used to like being the not cool one. So it didn't really bother me. And it's not that I haven't gone out and sown my oats and partied and done all that kind of stuff too, just never at work. There was always I had two rules: never at work and never if I was really upset.
Okay, so you were able to kind of keep these rules in place that you had, which actually are almost, I mean, don't do drugs when you're upset. That's pretty much why a lot of people do drugs. So kind of impressive actually that you were able to maintain that kind of discipline.
Well, I probably shouldn't take too much credit for it. I have a really low tolerance for alcohol, so I tend to get sick when I drink too much. And so that sort of just like compounds everything. It's like, oh, hey, I feel really shitty. So let me, feel good for an hour or two and then feel like really shitty again for the next like 12 hours. Um, and I also have a very low tolerance to like pain medications and things like that. They also make me sick. So a lot of it had to do, I think, with just my own body makeup. I don't tolerate a lot of that stuff very well. And like I said, it's not that I didn't party. But if you're really upset and you go out and I don't know if you see people sometimes at the bar and you know that they've had a bad day and it's like they're drinking to make it get better and it just seems like it gets infinitely worse, and then you're ugly crying and you're mad and you're angry, or you say something stupid or you break something or something like that. It just doesn't, for me, it just wasn't very appealing. So it was just something I decided to make a rule. If I know I'm gonna be hungover or feel terrible, I might as well have fun. And if I'm upset, I'd rather work through it and then party and have fun and then be sick. But
Makes total sense. In terms of stereotypes, which we were talking about, and I want to continue on for a little bit because there's a lot of them when it comes to the sex industry, and I I think if somebody were going to make me talk about something I don't know really much of anything about, but I've heard all about my whole life, right? Then I would imagine stripping as a gateway drug to prostitution and to drugs like heavy drugs, or maybe even at the level of human trafficking levels of prostitution and things like that, or it's a gateway to the porn industry and to being a pornographic star or something. Are these ideas based in reality, or is this just the fantasy that middle America sort of imagines is what this industry is about?
um, definitely, like we talked about, can be a gateway to drugs, I would say. And I think a lot of that has to do with the purity culture, the shame, not feeling okay about what you're doing. I've known a lot of dancers that have gotten into porn. I've been, recruited myself to do porn. It turns out I'm pretty stubborn, and the whole opposition to authority there served me well. Um, as far as the trafficking goes, that is something that I have a little bit of an issue with when it comes to stripping, and sometimes even prostitution. And definitely, there are dancers that are prostitutes. For me, that kind of defeats the purpose. Um, if you're going to be a stripper, the whole point is to not do a lot of work and make a lot of money. Not so. Um, But when it comes to the trafficking, there are a lot of outreach groups that will target strip clubs in particular and go around and talk to the dancers and say things like, don't you want to be loved? Don't you want to be respected? And then on their websites, they say, hey, we're going to strip clubs to fight human trafficking. Well, to be a stripper, you have to audition. So I don't know any traffic victims that are auditioning. You have to audition. You have to sign papers. Some places you have to sign business. You have to have business licenses. You have to have, in Nevada, you have to have a sheriff's card. You have to be fingerprinted, you get FBI background check, actually to be a legal prostitute in Nevada also. So it is not in the strip club's interest to traffic women that come in to be strippers. It just doesn't work. So if you see an outreach group saying, hey, we're stopping human trafficking by going into the strip clubs, they're lying. They're using that as an excuse to get money or donations or support. Sex trafficking those are the massage parlors. That's Epstein's Island. That's sex trafficking. Those are women that are being brought in under the radar. They're not documented. If you're going to be a legitimate porn star, like you are actually probably pretty close to the hub, right? The San Fernando Valley, Winnetka, Canoga Park, those places are, that's where porn is made. You have to sign agreements. You have to get weekly HIV tests and STD tests. And there's no incentive to traffic them. There just isn't. And frankly, they're not paid a whole lot, which was probably a good incentive for me. Partly, I didn't like the idea of going someplace and being like, hey, here's this guy, you're going to sleep with him. And I'm like, yeah, but what if he's a dick? What if I don't want to? I personally, I didn't like not having a choice. But when you're talking about legitimate porn outlets and companies and things like that, are they shady? Are they sketchy? Are they going to lie to you? Yeah, probably. But that's the same with the modeling industry and with, 1,000 other businesses like that also. I mean, look at the cheerleaders for the NFL teams, and for those, they're exploited in the same way. They're just not totally naked. So as far as the trafficking goes, I have never seen a sex traffic victim or somebody that I suspected to be a sex traffic victim in the strip club ever in 20 years. You're handing them your ID, you're giving them your social security number. It just doesn't make sense. But there were people that tell you that there is sex trafficking in the strip club.
Makes sense. And well, that's why we're talking, because I wanted to know the on the ground, view from inside, not what people think about it.
Yeah. And there's plenty of other shady stuff. There's tons and tons and tons of people there to exploit girls. And that's why you have to keep your head about you. That's why it's a good idea to be sober. But it's not that. It isn't that. They're not kidnapping you and forcing you to go on stage. It just, logically, it doesn't make any sense. You're going to notice if they're shoving somebody out on stage,
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, what does happen then? Because you mentioned there are, shady, sketchy things. And I think we've, covered the fact that drugs are rampant in the industry, and that makes sense. What else is going on there? Or what are the other pitfalls or dangers that are obvious or maybe not so obvious?
A lot of times you have men in authority. So you have people that are saying, hey, come out to dinner with me. You may have owners, you may have staff that are looking to exploit or, basically just sleep with, that kind of a thing. And then there is, you can definitely start going down the road to prostitution. If you're having a bad night, you might have a customer that's like, hey, come meet me here. You can make this amount of money, we'll call it good. And so that can be really tempting, which I don't particularly have an issue with unless it's somebody doing it against their will or they feel like they have to do it. I was years and years ago, a lot of girls from the club had an opportunity to go to the Playboy Mansion. There was going to be celebrities and all that kind of stuff. And I was immediately skeptical because I knew that we were coming from a strip club. And I knew that if I was going to go there and I didn't want to sleep with anybody, that was probably not going to be cool. That I was going to be the unpopular girl once again. So I declined to go because I wasn't sure of what type of security. I knew that because we were dancers in particular, that they were already going to be making assumptions about what we were going to do, and that a lot of girls were going to do that, and a lot of girls were going to be stoked to do it. I wasn't one of them, so I declined to go. I think sometimes, and not to bring up politics, but Stormy Daniels mentioned when she was talking about being alone in a room with Trump, and she says, I didn't really want to sleep with him, but I kind of felt like I had to just to end the whole encounter. That's the type of situation I'm talking about, where it is technically consensual, but you have somebody that's in a position of authority and you almost don't want to say no. You don't know what's going to happen if you do say no. You don't know if they're going to blacklist you, if they're going to, smear your name. There are certain people in the adult industry that if you don't go along with what they say, they will completely just ruin you 100%. And so while, everybody jokes, oh, she got paid to sleep with him and all that kind of stuff, I understood when she said that, she described the incident with her, I understood 100%, because you could be in that position. You're alone with somebody of that stature, gross as he is, and all you want to do is get out. And you're used to already using your body in that manner. So it's kind of like, to hell with it. Let me just get it over with and move on. So that's the type of exploitation that I'm talking about. Not, like I said, not like the massage parlor where, women are forced into that situation and maybe getting beaten or abused or something like that. It's more subtle. It's a more subtle exploitation than the blatant kidnapping type thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Totally makes sense. Have you run into other things in or out of the industry in terms of stereotypes or tropes that you just go, come on, or no, that's just not right, even though everybody kind of thinks that's how it is, or is this sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. That's how it is. Anything
Yeah,
else like that?
people thinking that I'm trying to sleep with their men. I would say that's probably the biggest one, and I don't understand where they're coming from there, because I'm a tease. What I did for a living was literally not sleep with guys. So I've had people that I thought were actually my really good friends, and when we got into another argument, they would throw that in my face, and I'm like, dude, have you seen your dude though? Like I'm cool, I'm really okay. Uh, yeah, that type of thing. Like yeah, I'd say that's probably the biggest that I personally encountered stereotype, other than the drugs and being in a bad relationship or having to support a man, that type of thing.
Okay. Now, what about violence in this industry? Underhanded, behind the scenes, maybe not obvious. It would make sense, but it's not necessarily that the world runs on what makes sense. That you wouldn't beat on strippers who are showing their body, and you're going to have bruises, stuff like that. Like, that doesn't really make sense that you would want to do that. And yet, like I said, the world doesn't really run the way we think it should all the time. How does that play out behind the scenes in that industry?
I've never seen a dancer be hurt or abused, or heard of a dancer be hit by any type of staff or owner or customer or anything like that at all. Once again, it's in the club's best interest to keep their performers safe. Period. I had actually, the only time I've ever been given a black eye, my son was he was like 1.5 or 2, and I was laying down on the couch like this, and he was sitting on the floor, and he was playing, and we were watching shows, and I was watching the show, and he just out of the blue threw his head back, and when he did, he hit me in the eye, and I got a black eye, and it's literally the only black eye I've ever had. I was not allowed to work. I was not allowed to work because they didn't. Number one, I was able to cover it up, but just in case, because it was a little swollen, but they didn't want people thinking that it had come from the club. So it is, as a performer, you are a performer. You're not, it is not, there's no reason for anybody to hit you that way. Now, dancer on dancer, yeah, I've seen that a couple times
Ah,
in like the dressing room and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's well, good. I didn't mean good, but like, you know,
Depends on your perspective.
yeah, like Okay, so that actually goes right to where I was going to go next, which is the behind the scenes in the dressing room, right? The competition, is it cutthroat? How does it work exactly? Because there's this idea that you got this crowd of guys or, people, I guess there could be women there as well, of course. And
Hmm.
you're going to go out there for your slot and you're going to do your performance like any other performer, stand up or, actors or whatever, and then you're going to go back to the dressing room until your next slot comes up. So whatever money is hitting the stage when you're up there, well, that's yours. So maybe not. How does that work as far as like why would there be competition and what is the competition about?
So there's two ways to make money as a dancer. There's basically your performance is twofold. You have your stage performance, which is like your advertising, right? And it differs from market to market. I've heard in places like Miami, where it's mostly stage shows. Mostly girls will make their money on stage. You see them make it rain and all that kind of stuff. It's a little different than how I've worked usually. You go out, you have your stage. Yes, you may have made quite a bit of money there. When you're on stage, that's all you. There is a basic blanket rule that girls on the floor aren't allowed to come up and sit at your tip rail because they don't, you're not supposed to take eyes off of the person that's on stage. But when you're done with your stage, you go out into the crowd and you try to get lap dances or private dances. That is where the money is made mostly. And getting back to the violence thing, that is the only time that I've ever been physically afraid. There have been a few times, and I write about it in my books, where I've been with a customer, and they're usually semi-private. There's always video cameras, there's always security, there's always bouncers. But there have been customers that have gotten handsy. I had a customer actually physically pick me up. I'm only like 5 foot. So for whatever reason, I don't like just arbitrarily pick my cat up off the floor because it's really unnerving to just be suddenly like lifted up off your feet. But I had this happen to me, and the person actually flipped me over and then pinned me on a couch. And he was like sort of semi joking, but he could have really hurt me. And that was really scary. But that is really where you make your money is you go in and you do lap dances. Sometimes they're full contact, sometimes they're not. It depends on the market. Back in 97 when I started, it was a little more conservative than it is now. And like I said, it definitely depends on where you go, what the specific rules are for whatever club or market you're at. But that's where it gets really competitive because you have customers that may see more than one girl. You have girls that may get possessive over a customer that spends a lot of money. They may start doing things that you're not going to do to make extra money, and then you end up. So most of the time, you end up fighting over customers. And then, of course, there's your spot in the dressing room, which gets a little middle schoolish. And so, that can cause conflict. There's 1,000 different reasons. I had somebody get irritated with me because I didn't like the amount of glitter they were using because it was like everywhere. And I'm not a fan of glitter. So that's where the competition comes in. Individual customers.
Cool. Okay, well that definitely makes sense. Do you have regulars? Does that happen in the stripping industry that people just keep coming back? That was kind of shown in that movie The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke, and he
Yeah.
kept coming back for Marissa Tomei, kept coming back. I
Yeah.
love you. He got personal even. Do things like that happen? And if they do
Yeah.
they happen often?
Yes. In fact, that's kind of the goal. Personally, you want somebody to come back. And especially if, I liked a lot of my customers. I had quite a few regulars and was quite fond of a good portion of them.
Right.
uh,
But you
Not
had
all of
some
them.
crossing lines.
Yeah, not even sometimes just personality wise.
Hmm.
Sometimes you're just like, oh, I can't stand you, but I'm going to pretend. Um, but yeah, no, regulars are definitely something to be. You want them. That's security. I worked at financial security. I would work mostly like weeknights, and so you get people that come in after work. And if I'm working Tuesday night was like my consistent night, I I always worked that night, which means customers would know when to find me, and they tend to be slow. So if I'm going to work a Tuesday night and we have maybe 50 customers all night long, and I know that I have two or three of them, I may only dance for two or three guys that night, but make quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, regulars are really the key. And of course, that depends on the market. If you're going to be in a different, like a touristy type area like Vegas, you're not going to have regulars like you would in Sacramento. Um, it's just it's a different scene. In Vegas, there's obviously a huge turnover with both girls and customers, and I think there's 30 or something different clubs. So it's different, but it definitely varies market to market. But regulars for me, especially in Sacramento, were the goal.
Makes sense. What you mentioned that you have security cameras, you have bouncers, you of course you have the the owners, bartenders, etc. You got people around. You go into the semi-private spaces, or are they fully door closed, fully private spaces when you're doing the private stuff?
Depends on the club and depends on the market. Um, that time when that customer picked me up, it was that curtain, and they did have cameras, and they were supposed to have somebody outside. They did not. I actually stopped working there because of that incident, because somebody was supposed to be watching me and they weren't, and I ended up having to handle that situation on my own. And it wasn't. He was really drunk, so he wasn't really like malicious. But had he been, I could have died, and there was nobody watching me, and so I left. I mean, like, permanently. I never went back to that club after that. It was a very good club too. Um, so it depends. I get a little weary when they're shutting the door. Most of the time, it's curtains that are separating. The club that I worked at most recent was booths. So you're like a bathroom stall with no door, covered in velour, if you can picture that.
I can, unfortunately,
Okay.
yes, I get the idea. Now, and then
Okay.
what about the relationship with the bouncers? They usually portray them in movies as kind-hearted teddy bears with a menacing front, kind of thing. But that's, and again, it's just another stereotype. What's the relationship with them like? Is it ever personal, or is it just they're doing their job, you're doing your job, or do you become friends with the other people at these facilities?
I would say that that stereotype is probably 70 to 80% accurate, but we tip them. So, they have a vested interest in not only protecting us, but in being nice. But I am very fond of the vast majority of my bouncers, the vast majority. Same thing with DJs. DJs, I don't know if you've gotten, actually, I think it might be chapter 9. The chapter in the book that you're reading right now, Expose Yourself, is about prayer. And I open that with a story about a DJ. I talk about basically praying to the DJ. But the DJ actually controls everything. So he's really the person you want to be friends with above anybody else. They control your stage, your lighting, all that kind of stuff. So, but you tip them. So there's a reason that they want to be your friend. Same thing with the bouncers. So
Makes sense. So it's its own kind of little ecosystem. It's its own little kind of economical system.
absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. And as a contractor, then you mentioned you're having to pay to be there. Does that mean you're renting time on their stage, or how does that work?
Exactly. It is called stage rent.
I just
Stage fee.
imagined that. I wasn't sure what the
Yeah.
deal was. Okay.
So similar to how hairdressers or nail salons may rent out their stations.
Okay. Makes sense. Now, you're a good chunk of your book the Expose Yourself book has to do with critical thinking and skepticism and having a skeptical attitude about things, and you're pretty blunt about it too. In terms of your ideas about belief and sort of arbitrary morality being enforced on people and what nonsense that is, and how people who really have no idea what they're talking about try to impose their ethical standards on sex workers. And so, where do you come down on this? At what point what behavior is acceptable, not acceptable to you in this industry? What have you seen that you just go, this really needs to stop, versus stuff that people are saying needs to stop that is perfectly safe and is perfectly legit?
Hmm. Honestly, I'm not sure that any of my own personal ethics or morality really differ in and out of the strip club. I mean, honestly, I just think a lot of it has to do with um, being kind to other people. I mean, I really think that, and as you get in later into the book, I read a lot about humanism and altruism. And I really honestly just believe that being kind to other people and being considerate to other people will ultimately pay off. I don't know if you're familiar with Shannon Q, but she makes a really good point about altruism, that the true definition of the word, that you don't actually have a personal motivation in helping people, um, that it's just purely to help people, is not necessarily true, because when you help people, it makes you feel good, but it also improves your society and your environment in itself. So I really feel like just being kind and being considerate of other people's perspectives, and that really applies whether you're working at Walmart or whether you're working in a strip club.
Agreed. Uh, it's chaos. Be kind. Got that tattooed on my arm.
Oh,
Yeah. It's kind of my motto in life. I think being kind is sort of the ultimate commandment. If we had to have commandments, I think that would be the one I'd go with. But okay, so then what about this business of enforced morality on the industry? What have you seen that you go, okay, these guys might have a point, but these guys over here are just talking nonsense?
enforced morality, like how?
Well, you have the Christian right who would just as soon shut everything down because all of it is dirty, all of it is from Satan. It's all evil
Well,
and
I
must be destroyed, right? And then you have
well,
varying
I
degrees of that. So,
well, I think they may say that, but I don't think they would ever actually do that, because a lot of them own strip clubs and are strip club customers.
well, there we
So,
go.
and I think that once you, I think once you get in, I actually write about a customer who took a lot of time talking to me about his faith, and then used God as a justification to try and touch me where I was not allowing him to touch, and actually told
Yeah.
me that he was directed by God to do that. In fact, there's a chapter. The chapter is actually entitled "God Told Me to Touch Your Pussy,"
I
which is,
remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I think they're just saying that. I think that's a load of crap. When you get to my my chapter on conspiracies, I write that it's actually the Christian right who is backing and a secret proponent of strip clubs in the porn industry, because it gives them something to stand on. It gives them something to fight against. But in the end, sex is sex. It's natural. It's nothing to be ashamed of. So I think that type of purity culture, forced morality, is something, like I said, it goes outside of the porn industry, sex industry, strip clubs. It's a means of control. There's no substance behind it. It's
Yeah.
not immoral. Sex isn't inherently immoral.
Well, no, of course it's not. We wouldn't have a species if we couldn't have sex. There's clearly nothing wrong with the sexual act. Um, we are still overcoming though, and I guess I get to talk a little bit intelligently about this, having come from a purity culture cult. That we've still got a lot of hurdles to overcome when it comes to the idea of sex versus the idea of perversion. Right. This is the word Hubbard would use with Scientology is all homosexuality, anything basically that falls under LGBT, anything that falls under bondage or any of that. Any experimentation, any exploratory stuff. If it's not just kind of straight vanilla, then it's just bad because sex is only for reproduction, and that's where it's good and it's not good anywhere else, right? And this has just been this like snail crawl of progress culturally overcoming this sort of dark ages mentality. But I find it fascinating that because I didn't particularly think the thought through of, oh, these are the same people who own the strip clubs. That's a little surprising to me, actually, because that's actually a matter of public record almost. I mean, I think you could actually, uncover that pretty quickly.
I
So,
mean,
how does that hypocrisy work?
I think the same hypocrisy, any religion or any faith that puts that. I mean, in my own family, when I first started dancing, it was, how could you do that? And then it was like, oh, can I borrow some money? All of a sudden, it's okay. So
Right.
I'm going to say that the hypocrisy is probably the common denominator in all of those faiths. And um, I was discussing. I watched actually your interview to get a little background on you with Mama Atheist, um, because I was very curious about Scientology. The only thing that I had ever heard was Leah Remini and Tom Cruise and all that stuff, and so I was interested in it. And to hear you talk about it, I was watching it with a secular friend, somebody who was raised secular, atheist, not and never gone to church, looks at religion of all types as what the fuck, right? And I'm like, oh my God, it's so crazy. How could anybody ever believe that? It's so obviously false. How do you, and you talked about the incremental, how they introduce it little bits and little bits and little bits. And you don't actually get to the other stuff until way later. And I started to see the parallels in Catholicism and Christianity. And I'm like, and my friend he looks at me and he goes, you realize that there's no difference between that and Catholicism. Because I'm like, oh my God, Scientology, it's so weird. It's so weird. And then I'm like, it's not though. It's really not though. It's actually the same thing. And then I felt like, I kind of felt bad because I was like, oh, the Scientology guy, how weird. And then I was like, oh no, I was so wrong. So my apologies first off, because it wasn't that much different than what I thought was normal. Growing up, and some of the stuff that I believed with the blood sacrifice and the whole, all that stuff. It's literally not any weirder. But yeah, it's a means of control. That's really all that is. The morality, the idea that one faith or one belief has some type of ownership on morality and has some type of say, and is able to say that this is okay and this isn't. When it comes to sex, if it's consensual and it's of age, that's all that matters. There's nothing outside of that. If it feels good and it's not hurting anybody, that's really got to be the bottom line.
I would tend to agree on that, because frankly, it's nobody else's business what you're doing in the privacy of your own home with consenting adults. It just
Absolutely.
it just isn't, And I'm pretty broad on that myself, I think that I think we've got a long way to go before we get everybody else on that page though.
I'm trying.
Yeah, I know, me too. Yeah. Hey everyone. I want to introduce you to a new sponsor for my show, which I think is a vital service that, especially now, is something we might all want to avail ourselves of, and that is BetterHelp. If you are feeling anxious or sad or just want someone to talk to, who better than a licensed professional therapist? I know in the past there was some controversy with this, but that's been addressed, and I'm happy to endorse this service now. BetterHelp is a professional service which will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. And you can start communicating in under 24 hours. It's not a crisis line, it's not self help, it is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise available, which may not be locally available in your area. This is actually a worldwide service, not just here in the US. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions at your convenience instead of having to wait on theirs. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. I endorse this service, but check it out for yourself. Visit their website and read their testimonials. And if you sign up using my special URL, you'll get 10% off your first month. Look them up at betterhelp.com/Chris Shelton. Pretty easy to remember, right? That's betterhelp.com/Chris Shelton. Sign up today. And I want to be clear also, of course, that, I've made statements in the past, and I'll stick to this, that that there are differences in these groups as far as like something like Scientology versus Catholicism, as far as the level of of control or abusive power, or the consequences of trying to leave. For example, the consequences of trying to leave Scientology are fairly drastic.
Yeah.
Leaving Catholicism, you might get a talking to by your aunt or something, but it's not really the same thing as they're going to stalk you. So there are differences that way, but I definitely am on the same page with you in terms of how organized religion, both of these groups and many, many others, feel it that it's somehow their moral duty to tell other people how to live their lives, and on that we are in complete agreement that this is just utter tripe. So I always have to clarify that for people, because people tend to get a little sensitive about, oh, you're attacking my beliefs, and I go, no, it's not about your beliefs. I don't care what you believe. You know, in the same way, I don't care about what you're doing in the bedroom. I really don't care what's going on up here either. It's just, how much of what's going on up here do you think I need to be in compliance with? You know? That's
Definitely.
that's
I have
right.
an article coming out in Free Thought today. I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be published, but kind of along those lines, where there are people that consider themselves Christian or believers or something like that, who have almost conformed their belief to the people that they care about. So, like in the case of my mom, when I told her I was an atheist, she said, and she thought about it for a minute, and then she said, "Well, the God that I believe in would never send you to hell. Um, he would. You're a good person. You would never go to hell." And that totally conflicts with how she was raised. It's absolutely, that's not what Catholics teach. And that's not what she was taught. But what she did was she morphed her beliefs to be inclusive to the people that she loved. Same thing with my son. She was trying to sprinkle him with holy water when we came over there, and was just doing it kind of like on the sly, like following him around. She had a little bottle and was just trying to drip it on him. And I was like, I looked at her and I said, "Do you really think that he would go to hell because I didn't have him baptized?" And she thought about it and she said, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, then what are you doing?" And she let it go and she never brought it up again. And so I write about that. I have neighbors who are very religious and have never mentioned it, but they bring me flowers. They help people. They're very caring. They're good people. There are people that have beliefs that don't push them on other people. That I don't know if their beliefs make them better people, but they're comfortable with what they have, and I'm really okay with that. Until, like I said, you have like the outreach groups that are coming into the strip clubs that are telling you that nobody loves you and nobody respects you, and that you need to go and bow down and get on your knees over here, as opposed to what you're doing over here. And and then on the other hand, we'll also use the cause of sex trafficking, which is real and hurts people. And instead of actually directing their efforts to help, they are trying to enforce their morality on an industry that doesn't need it. If they really cared, they'd be in the massage parlors.
Yeah, let's actually go there for a second, because I'm glad you mentioned that. It reminded me of something I wanted to follow up with you on earlier. Because it seems like you've drawn a line here that there is an area of this industry that is trafficky, dangerous stuff. What was your experience with that? Not saying in terms of you working there, but what did you see, observe, experience of that?
Other than maybe one or two girls that might have fallen in with somebody that, like a pimp, somebody that would get them into prostitution and get them in a position either by drugs or money or abuse or something like that. And actually, but those women would be taken out of the strip club. They wouldn't be there while that was happening. That was somebody that might be sucked in by a boyfriend or something like that who they thought cared about them, and then all of a sudden they're doing things that they don't want to do. But other than that, I never saw, like I said, I've never seen anybody forced to be on stage ever. It just doesn't, logically, it just doesn't match. It just doesn't happen. You're not pushing somebody out on stage. You have to want to be on stage.
No,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely. That's crystal clear. And I'm glad that you've said it so bluntly and so boldly, because now it's super clear that that is, this is not a trafficking part of the industry, but there are these other parts that are.
I
Um,
don't think that's part of the legitimate industry at all.
uh-huh.
Other than maybe things that you might see on like Pornhub, where I've run across videos where I'm like, this looks like something bad.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that, but that's not part of the legitimate industry. Like I said, when it comes to
Mm,
porn, if you're going to go down to LA and you're going to be a porn star, you're getting HIV tests, you're signing contracts, all that, you're providing ID and social security number. I mean, traffickers aren't going to put you with, vivid pictures because there's a record. And I don't know a lot about sex trafficking and the issue personally, because it's just something that's never really come into my realm. But I believe that these women are women that are being brought in from out of the country or kidnapped or stolen or things like that. I don't think that it's not part of the legitimate sex industry where you're filing taxes. If you're being sex trafficked, you know what I'm saying? You're not collecting 1099s.
absolutely. No, for sure. No question about it. And we definitely see indicators of this throughout what you just see online,
Yeah.
coming out of Eastern Europe, coming out of the Philippines, coming out of Southeast Asia. You see, this is where there's a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of trafficking and nonsense and kidnapping and violence and stuff going on in those parts of the world with this, and it's reflected in not the professional industry, but in the amateur industry of porn videos that you see, where you're looking at people who are clearly not there because they want to be there, things like that.
Yeah.
And that's awful, but it's definitely a different thing from what you experienced. And I'm glad we can differentiate those two things, because
Yeah.
they get muddied in people's heads, clearly, if they're coming to
I
strip
think
clubs.
I think that they muddy it on purpose, to be honest. And I think
Mm,
part of that is the way to control the morality narrative is by
right.
saying, look at all this bad stuff. They don't want to acknowledge that women and men choose to do this. They
Well,
they don't
yeah.
want to acknowledge that it's a choice, because if you paint it as something that people are forced to do, it's easier to demonize.
Absolutely, especially at your Sunday sermons when you're doing in a whole nother round of fundraising in a whole different venue.
Yeah.
Or, and that's a really interesting thing you brought up, because I didn't actually know that at all. I didn't know that you could have people who are going to Sunday service, screaming and crying about how awful this industry is, while they're literally, own it, participating in it, part of it. That And then playing both sides. That's fascinating to me. Wow. So,
I've got a lot of Christian customers.
yeah,
In
pet.
fact, actually, how I ended up getting involved with the FFRF, I got involved with them online. I was having an issue with my son's public school. They stepped in, and then I submitted an article to them, and they published it. And it was actually like my first published piece ever outside of my own self publishing. So I was like, oh my God.
I know how
And
that feels.
they're,
It's kind of
yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, this is great.
Yeah.
And so they had their convention was in San Francisco. It was at the Hyatt, and the hotel was stupid expensive. So I asked a regular if he would pay for it. And it's somebody who happens to be, he doesn't consider himself Christian, but he considers himself to be conservative and a believer. And, he was like, well, I'll go ahead and help you get to this atheist convention because it will help you find your path. He goes, you're going to get there and thinking I'm going to meet a bunch of satanic, horrific, horrible, awful people. And it turns out I went there, I met the chapter president of my local chapter, who suggested expose yourself. and met, 1,000, 1,500 people that I absolutely adored. Maybe one or two that sucked. But for the most part, it was such an eye-opening experience, and it was what really led me on this path to being an atheist advocate, was going to that convention. But the irony is that I wouldn't have gone if I'd had to buy my own hotel room.
Interesting.
So the person that actually paid for that was somebody who considers themselves a conservative believer, who thought that I would go there and it would take me off of this path I was on.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Interesting. The problem with you was that you were an atheist. Huh. Atheist advocacy. This is an interesting topic. Actually, but before we dive into that, because I have questions about that too, of course. Is this an industry? Well, clearly, you've made a living at it. Is it a good living?
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I
It's
mean,
pretty good.
how good do you have to be to have a good living? I mean, can you suck and have a good living? Do you have? I mean, what are the skill set that you develop that? And I mean all the skills. I don't just mean you can fluidly move your body, but like, what else is there involved in this that I almost want to ask? I mean, for people out there who are wondering, about getting into this industry, like what is the skill set?
I think being personable, being able to connect with people. Like I said, I actually really, really enjoyed and liked a lot of my customers. A lot of them. I enjoyed the interactions I had with them, not only sexual but intellectual. You meet people from all over the world, which is a terrible time right now to, you know, now is not the time you want to meet people from a whole lot of different places and like get touch them.
Right.
But a year ago, it was cool. So I think being personable really helps. Being sober really helps. But that's, it's hard to say. It can be really feast or famine. And dancing really has very, very little to do with it as far as the skills you need to be successful as a stripper. I write about that in my second book also. It's entitled "I Can't Dance," because for reals, I'm not that great of a dancer.
So
Because
you're not a Jennifer Lopez on the stage?
oh no.
Because this is well, it's another stereotype actually that's kind of popping up right now.
Some of them are. There are some extremely talented dancers, and some of the girls that do, are very skilled at full work, and they fly. I'm like, I don't have workers' compensation. I'm keeping my ass on the ground. You know what I'm saying? The last thing I'm going to do is climb up the pole, fall on my head, and yeah, I think really being personable, being strong, and being sober is really one of the biggest things to making money and keeping your money. Is not getting caught up into the drugs and the alcohol, and being able to really keep your head about you, not getting wrapped up into some of the other, the social issues, the little groups and the cliques and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's kind of hard to not make money. You
Mm,
really, you know,
mm.
it can be pretty lucrative. Of course, it definitely depends on the economy. I was in Vegas when the crash happened, and literally it was hopping one night, and the next night it was like crickets. And then after that, it got pretty cutthroat, and it was hard. It was really, really hard. So I always have looked at the strip club industry as almost like a microcosm of the greater economy, because it really tells you where people are at with disposable income.
Right. Exactly. I kind of am experiencing a little bit of that myself right now with a YouTube channel and Patreon support, because and my Patreon supporters are awesome. And I really haven't lost that much, which is the only thing that's really keeping the lights on in the show going here, because YouTube is kind of tanking right now on the ad revenue. So it's very, I definitely feel you on that one. Um, Okay, atheism, skepticism. So, was that your first introduction to this world, this going to this convention and seeing and meeting all these people and being like, "Oh, what's this all about?" Or had you read books before that or talked with other people in this community? how did that journey go?
Um, After I lost my nephew um, to cancer, I had really started to look into the scientific aspects of consciousness, life after death, basically as a route to grieving and to understand the loss of a child. Um, that was obviously really difficult. And so that was when I kind of started to read about it. And atheist was a dirty word as a kid, right? Atheists, they eat babies, they steal, they rob, they rape, they're Satan worshipers, they're really bad people. I never really even knew the definition of the word. I never bothered to look at it because it was horrible. You're an atheist, you might as well be a serial killer. Obviously, that's not true. So I started reading some books on skepticism, some books on science, even got into some quantum physics, astrophysics. I mean, and on a layman's, like, I mean, like, I wouldn't ever, Mama Atheist is what an astrophysicist. Yes, she's not somebody I'm going to go toe to toe with. Like, I barely get the concepts, but I understand the greater, my interest in it was understanding what we understand as a whole about the world and how it functions in the universe. And that was really what I was interested in. And that was when I realized that I was an atheist. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I am. And then, of course, the internet happened. And I really kept it to myself because it was still, the stigma and the stereotypes were still there. And so I just kind of followed some pages. I believe that Friendly Atheist was my very first atheist follow ever, which led to FFRF. And actually, Seth Andrews was another one, The Thinking Atheist. That got me too. And Penn Jillette was one of my first atheist books I ever read. God No. And actually, you have the audible version of Expose Yourself, but in the print and the digital versions in the back, I list a bibliography where I list Carl Sagan's, Penn Jillette, a lady by the name of Mary Roach, uh, Dawkins and Hitchens and books that I read. So just to kind of give people an example of things that I read that kind of led me to where I am. The Skeptics Guide to the Universe is one of my favorite ones too. And they're not really atheists, but it's a really good book to teach you critical thinking and the scientific method and how to ask questions to get around your biases and logical fallacies and all those things. So that was really how I actually became involved. I didn't really intend to be an advocate until I went to that convention and met my local chapter president, Judy Saint. Actually, she's a contributing editor of Expose Yourself.
Nice, nice. And so now, what have you been doing in terms of activism? Or being an advocate for skepticism and for critical thinking.
Basically just being active online, writing more articles. Like I said, I just wrote another article for FFRF. I have also met some other independent authors, and so that has started to. I'm working on a fiction project right now. So it may be that I will always be an advocate for atheism. Certainly, I want to promote the idea that it's okay to say that you're an atheist, that you're okay to question things, which is really what my book is about. It may be, however this project turns out, that I start, moving in the direction of fiction. But I think my main goal is to know that it's okay to say that you're an atheist. And I think that by me, even just being who I am, that I'm able to at least offer one more voice and say, hey, you don't have to hide. You have a place to go. Because that was how I felt when I found, like I said, Hennett and Seth and people along those lines online, was feeling like I wasn't by myself. I wasn't alone. It was okay to say that I don't believe in stuff that other people believe in, because you can really get, even if it's just people that say, God is energy or God is love or, the universe this or karma, if you say that you don't believe in anything, it can be lonely.
Yeah, it really
So,
can. It really can. It's interesting how our beliefs and things change over time as well, and how we can, sort of change our minds about things. And I think that's a feature, not a bug. Some people come down on you for that, hypocrite. Well, what about this? What about that? And you just go, hey, man. One of the things about critical thinking is I get to change my mind. I don't have to maintain fixed, dedicated views on things and stick with them just because I thought that when I was 20. In fact, I think people who think the same things when they're 40 as when they were 20 are idiots. I mean, how could you possibly go through, you know, half of your life, think one thing, and then go through a whole nother half of it and think the same damn things? You've had, I mean, come on, this is crazy balls. My beliefs are, I'm a very introspective person. I'm constantly examining my own thoughts, my own beliefs and ideas about things, because and from a critical eye, and challenging them. And I know, I know some people would be like, no, you don't ever do that. But I do, really. I do. And I've changed all kinds of things. I look back at podcasts I did 4 years ago and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I was saying that. Because I've just changed. And that's okay. Are you, as a skeptic atheist now, are you open to the possibility that there could be more to life than what we currently are experiencing or sensing? And if so, what uh, kind of things would get you thinking in that direction? And I'm not necessarily talking about just a God belief, because God is kind of uh, this great big huge thought that everybody's kind of got their own ideas about. But even the idea of more to life, or maybe life is something different than what we understand it to be, or maybe where it comes from, stuff like that. I don't know. What do you think of about these things when you think about this?
well, this sometimes is a controversial term, although I don't understand why it's so controversial. I consider myself to be an agnostic atheist, and one of the reasons is because agnosticism refers to knowledge,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know everything. I will likely never ever know everything. As it stands to the current evidence, I have no belief in God, which is what makes me an atheist. I think always the most honest answer is I don't know, and I want to learn. And I have actually a book on consciousness waiting on my bedstand, because I'm very interested in the idea of consciousness, whether it goes outside, does it exist outside of our bodies and our brains? Do I think that? I don't. I don't think that it does. I think there's no real evidence for that at all. But yeah, I'm very curious about that. I think it's extremely arrogant to ever have a lot of concrete ideas and beliefs about what we know about our world, because we are always learning things. And that's really the coolest thing about science, I think, in particular, is that it does change its ideas. It does change according to evidence and new learnings. And if you are not open to learn new things, you're you're stuck where you're at. You're never going to grow as a person. So I'm absolutely open to learn more, and I'm curious about what scientists and what other people are learning too. So yes, I am open to it. Do I hope that when I die, I'm going to be a ghost and get to like haunt the world, or going to go to some place where I'm going to see my mom again, or my cat from when I was 10? That would be fucking awesome. Do I think that's the case? Not particularly. Um, but that's no, I think learning is growth. And I think when you start to close your mind off, you stop from growing. Actually, I read a book. I did an interview with him not too long ago. Brian Keene, he's a horror author, but he actually just wrote a book called The Triangle Belief and of Belief, and he talks about what you just mentioned, where what you believe when you're 20 as opposed to what you're 40, and he explains it as a triangle. Basically, starting as a kid, you believe in everything. You go up to the point where you're pretty much just materialistic and this is that, and then you kind of start coming down on the other side where you become more open to things that you may not understand yet. And that was very interesting, especially coming from somebody who's a fiction writer and also a nonfiction writer, which I was unaware of. So I was really excited to read that of his, because that's kind of where I'm at, where I was like, I don't know if I can write fiction. So that was a good place for me to start. But yeah, no, we always need to keep learning. I think that's important.
I think so too. And I think so because I think that's where, the basis of a changing belief would come from is the willingness to continue to receive new information and do something with it and modify existing beliefs as a result. This is just the formula practically of good thinking or critical thinking. Um, in fact, I'm even a little suspicious of people in the atheist community who are like, no, it's science, and science says there's nothing. And you just go, actually, science doesn't say that. Science doesn't really have a whole lot to say about that because we know science doesn't touch it. You can't go there. So even the militant ones in this community, I go, no, I don't think so. There's a thing that happened to me, and I'm wondering, if it's similar in your journey, where you do get really curious about, okay, what do we know? What is this quantum physics all about? What is this science stuff all about? What is psychology know and not know? What is neuroscience? Where are we at? You hear about brain imaging, you hear about this and that, and you think they've got it all taped, and then you start looking into it, and you go, no, there's an awful lot. It's almost like that curve. I don't know if it really is the same as the triangle thing, what I'm saying right now, but maybe I'm saying similar words of you get super curious about, okay, well, what do we know for sure? And you find out not much.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit of a rude awakening for me. And I've discussed this a little bit, I think. It was very disappointing at first to learn that the bleeding edge of science is out in places where we don't have answers to stuff that I really, really, really want answers to. And not just the big question of God. I mean, I'm talking about, like, where's consciousness coming from? Little questions like that. So so you find out that we actually have so much yet to learn, that the humanities overall are just in their infancy. And anybody who thinks that psychology's got this all taped, or, psychiatry or sociology, or again, neuroscience, nah, man, we're just getting started. And it opens up what happened for me was first an initial hit a brick wall of, damn it, there aren't any certain answers here either. What the hell? Because I came from a place of great certainty, and it became a habit to be that certain. And then, oh yeah, no, you don't get that in science. Sorry. And very disappointing. But then, right past that disappointment was the silver lining of, oh, wait a second. We're going to have a lot of fun trying to figure this stuff out. That's what we're going to do. And then it becomes an adventure.
That's exactly how I looked at it.
Yeah. That you too.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. And although when I was a kid, it was the certainty that I doubted, that everybody was telling me, but this is it and this is it. And I'm like, but how did you know that? Like, how do you know that?
Yes.
And as I started to get older, probably, let's say 25, 30, and I really started, I had already kind of left religion behind. I mean, as an adolescent, I was like, well, this is ridiculous, obviously, the blood thing and what, that was easy to let go of.
Yeah, that was pretty easy to look at and go, come on, guys, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah, it was like, no, okay. Right. So that was pretty easy to let go of, but there were certain things that I thought that I was certain about. And as I got older and experienced death and loss and things like that, and those questions, that was when I was like, well, no, you know what, I want to know. And so I think I went through probably some of the same journey that you did, as far as being curious. And then it was like, oh, well, there really aren't any answers. And you go through that little bit of a grief period where it's like, well, God, I really wanted to know. I read a book called The Science of the Soul, I think it was, but it was about the search for the existence of a soul. And when you realize that there's really nothing there, scientifically concrete to say that there is. And that was what led me into like quantum physics and things like that. So I looked into things like reincarnation and the proof for that. And that's where Mary Roach's book, Spook, came in, because she delved into a lot of that. And then why do people believe what they believe and all that kind of stuff. But it was the certainty that I grew up with in religion that was like, there's nothing certain here. How are you're so positive that this is the case, and yet it is so illogical and goes against everything that we actually know. How do you compartmentalize the whole God and son and blood and death and torture thing with science? And so for me, the two were always like disconnected, but it was the certainty that kind of irritated me, because how can you be so certain? But the certainty in the atheist community is along the same lines. We know so little, as opposed to what there is to know. But like I said, am I an atheist? Do I believe that there's a God? I don't. If God were to come down and smack me on the ass, I mean, I would have to change my mind. So, but as it stands right now, I'm a pretty hardcore atheist. But as far as being militant about it, sometimes I get a little irritated when people put their faith in God and stop trying because they think, oh, well, this stuff is just going to happen to me, or this was meant to be, or there's some kind of path. That really bothers me, because I think it limits people personally to from achieving their goals. If you're looking, like the customer said, oh, well, you're going to find your path. There's a path for you out there. And I'm like, there is a path for me, but you know who's making that path? Me. I'm making that path. Nobody's divined that out. That it's me that makes my path. And so people that are sitting, working a shitty job, not doing what they want to do because they think somehow some divine being is going to open up this opportunity for them that they just have to sit back and wait for. That's when I really kind of take issue with the idea of God and destiny and fate and those kinds of issues. But that type of certainty definitely exists on the other side. You have to acknowledge, if you're not a shithead, that you don't know everything.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think I've only been part of this world of the skeptic atheist community, right, for a few years. I got out of Scientology in 2013, and basically that year is when I got into this. So 7 years, right? And I think, from what I've seen and heard over that time, that the community as a whole is more cognizant of that now. I think when I first got out, Atheism Plus, I think, had just happened or just died or something, and or was dying. It was in its death throes, right? And deservedly so. And there was a lot of railing and arguing in the community about things, and a lot of the hardcore guys, the like, if you believe in God, you're a fucking idiot, right? Those guys, they kind of faded over the years, and one of them even like kind of rebranded a bit. TJ, the Amazing Atheist, hardcore guy. Right now, he's more of rebranded more as an edgelord than a hardcore atheist. Right now, he just talks shit about everything. So, because that's kind of where he comes from. But some of the other guys you don't really hear about a whole lot anymore. And I find that interesting. I think that this idea is permeating the community, that we need to be a little bit more, we don't have to curb what we think, and we don't really have to curb a whole lot of what we say, but we need to have a little bit of an attitude adjustment that we're part of the world too, and we have people to get along with. And these people are believers, and you can't just run around telling them all that they're a bunch of fucking morons because they have a belief that you can't disprove. So what are you doing? And I get it. With all the things you just described, I agree completely. When they overstep, that's wrong too. When they're pushing too much, I'll push back. I'll absolutely push back on that. Um, but again, at the end of the day, I don't really care what's going on up here. I care what you do with it. And I think that that actually applies both ways. I think that applies in the atheist community as well as in the believer community.
It does. And, definitely when I first became vocal about it, I was pretty harsh. I was I was definitely like, well, you're a dumbass if this is what you think. And I have softened up a little bit. Um, the more people I meet, uh, if only because some people do need to feel that somebody's watching out for them. They need that comfort in their life. And if that doesn't permeate or it doesn't impede their progress, either in their personal lives, or it doesn't inflict any harm on anybody else, then who am I? I don't care. I don't care who you believe in. If it makes you feel better, then that's good. There's when my mom passed, I was jealous at one point, of my siblings who believed that she was in heaven, and I didn't hold that belief, and I still don't hold that belief. Um, do I hope that her consciousness lives on? God, that yes, but that hope is pretty freaking tiny. I don't. I really don't believe that that is the truth. But I did see that they found comfort in that. So, did I go around to my siblings, or did I say to the priest when he's giving her last rites, you're full of shit? No, no, you don't do that. That's not what you do. Did I get comfort from the priest? I did. I absolutely did. Holding his hand and doing what I knew that she wanted. I did get comfort. Was he soothing, and was he nice, and did he speak at her memorial for free? And yeah, I did find comfort in that. Do I believe in the supernatural element of it? I don't. But there was a certain comfort there. And maybe it's cultural because that was how I grew up. And I was not abused, um, in any way, shape, or form by religion or Catholicism or anybody in that at all. Not at all, other than being told I was going to hell. I do find that a little, that's good. I have a bit of an issue with that. Telling me I was born a sinner, that's a bit of a sticking point. But the trappings around it, people need that. And I think, like, when it comes to my neighbors, or it comes to other people that are religious, and they use that as a force for good in their lives and a force to help other people, cool with that. It's when they're actively hurting people and using God or supernatural things as a justification to harm other people. That's when it really becomes an issue. But yeah, no, I think it's arrogant one way or the other to try to say that you know something that we just don't know. We just can't know for right now. But like I said, do I believe in a God? I do not. I do not. I am still an atheist, so I'm still
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to be the last person to try to talk you out of that. You and I are amazingly on the same page on things in terms of what we're talking about right now. Agnostic, atheist, 100%. And I've quit talking about it because it is controversial. People get pissed at you about it. And it's like, look, man, all I'm saying is I don't know. There shouldn't really be anything wrong with that. But there's this need that people have to have a position, to hold an opinion, to be certain about things. And they want you to be certain too. And you kind of go, I'm actually adjusting my head around the idea that it's okay to not be certain about something. And for me, that's progress. That's a thing I need to do. So don't get in my way, like let me have this. And I also agree, on that. In fact, the thing that first got me thinking in this direction was exactly what you just brought up. Am I going to go after an 80-year-old, grandmother Catholic woman who, you know, does her rosary, whatever she's, does her Hail Marys or whatever. I don't even know what to call them, but am I going to go after her in the twilight years of her life and try to strip her of the of beliefs that give her comfort and emotional support? Why would I do that? That's crazy talk, and then I also realized the same thing applied with people in drug recovery, people in alcohol recovery. Sometimes, they go to these programs and they get a belief in a higher power, but it actually truly makes a positive impact in their life. And that's what that individual needs. And it's far from me to tell them, you don't need God in order to have morality, because that guy in this place at that time, that is what he needs. I'm not going to take that away from him. No way. Over time, maybe we can have conversations and fine. But I'm not going to get in that guy's face about that. If that belief is keeping him off drugs and he wants to be off drugs, Who am I to get in the way of that? Let me.
That's, oh, sorry.
No, no, no. Go.
I actually, there's a chapter called Some Strippers Need Jesus. And that is
Yeah.
literally what I talk about there as far as being able to create boundaries with yourself to where you can insulate yourself from other people's beliefs that they're destructive, but also be understanding if you have, because I've worked with many girls that have been in positions where they need something. And if that handout happens to be religious and it isn't of the sort that was invading the clubs, and it is actual genuine help and it's help, then fuck it. Then you know what I'm saying? If they're getting
Yeah.
beat up or they're going to die of an overdose, by all means, do whatever you need to get out of there at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I think what we're dealing with that, for those out there who just can't imagine that anything I'm saying here right now makes any sense. Let me contextualize it a little bit further and see what you think about this, because I've never said any of this stuff out loud. I think it's cultural, and I think that that need that they have is a cultural thing, because it's not like nobody ever heard of Jesus until they went to AA. I mean, it pervades our entire culture. You know who the guy is. You know what the basic belief system is. If you grow up in a Western country, that's certainly a truth. I can't say the same for Eastern countries. I don't know. Um, so you already have this established idea of there's a hierarchy, there's a God, there's a Jesus. This is how it basically works, and I think that's why it becomes a go-to. Whereas it's true, you wouldn't have to have that belief to have a moral system. But if that's the cultural context in which you grew up, that's how you understand where morality comes from. And that's the context of your life. And it's going to take work to undo that. It's not just a conversation. It's not just a social media argument. It's not just a screaming in the guy's face or a woman's face. You're an idiot. Yeah, how dare you? There's no evidence of what you believe. You're not going to get anywhere with any of that. So I think it goes back actually to, if we really want to deal with that, we have to deal with childhood indoctrination. And I think that's a place where I go into actually blatantly saying that I believe it's child abuse, to not necessarily to inculcate a belief in a child, because parents are going to do that no matter what I say or anybody else says about it. But this business of you're going to hell, Jesus camp, anybody who doesn't believe what we believe is evil and the devil is in their head. I mean, this kind of stuff, this extreme nonsense, it's abuse. It's psychological abuse, it's not physical abuse. Unfortunately, these households often lead to physical abuse, and the physical abuse is even part of the dogma, you know, i.e., Bill Gothard or other Christian cultists. So that's where I look at the source of that problem. I don't look at the individual believer and go, it's all about you. I think it's a much larger situation we're going to need to deal with. What do you
Well, and
think?
I think that when I personally came out to people in my family who've obviously known me my whole life, I'm a regular blood donor. I donate time, and I got fur yesterday though. I've always acted on an ethical, moral ground. I always have. And when I told a couple of people in particular that I was an atheist, the first thing they say is, well, you're immoral and you're a bad person, or you're wrong, or you're this. And it's like, but I haven't changed. That word didn't change who I am. And I've always been that way. So when somebody says to me, well, how can you have any morals? I have the same morals that I've always had. And you thought that I was a moral person before, but now you don't think I'm a moral person. And all of a sudden I'm a bad person, but yet my actions haven't changed. Just identifying as an atheist didn't change who I am, but somehow you equated the two, and now I'm bad and I'm a wrong person and I'm immoral. And that is where I take issue, and have lost relationships over that in particular, because now you decide to shit on everything that I've done over my 40 years. And not saying that I'm any kind of saint or, perfect person. Obviously, I've done some shitty things, but I do try to help people, and I do try to help people from a genuine point of just wanting to help, whether the true definition of altruism exists or not, I still try to operate. I've always operated on those basics of humanism before I even knew what humanism was, but I was still an atheist. Um, and before I even knew what atheist was, I still acted that way. For somebody to all of a sudden now look at me like I'm a bad person because I don't believe in God is, I've had to draw some lines there. Because that means that you aren't taking me in as a person. You're not looking at the whole person. Yeah, I've done some crappy things, but I always try to do good when I can. And what I believe isn't relevant. And if you can't separate the fact that I don't believe what you believe, and now all of a sudden I'm a bad person, you can't take the actions away from the beliefs. That, like I said, it's ruined some relationships for me. It really has.
I hear you on that. Me too. And that's rough because you can't control other people and what they're gonna how they're gonna react to you and stuff. And sometimes you do have to do that. I've had to do it many times. I'm not big on getting insulted. I got some hair trigger buttons, and it's just how it is. I ain't perfect, and I know that the things that I talk about, that I want people to be kind. I understand the world's a rough place, but you come at me, and I I got a fight or flight mechanism too. So that's gonna happen. And on a longer term too, you get to choose which people you want in your life. You get to choose who you allow in your inner circle. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. Not at all. Let me throw something else out at you in terms of belief in all of this. Have you ever watched this show, The Good Place?
No.
It's worth watching. It's four
Okay.
seasons. It's on Netflix. I'm pretty sure they'll have the fourth season up there before too long. Um, it just ended. It was that's the end of the show. The whole story arc is four seasons, and it's about these people who go to heaven or the good place. They actually never use the word heaven or hell. They just talk about the good place and the bad place.
Mhm.
And I learned at the very end of the show, for me, my experience of watching it was that was a double entendre, and I didn't get it till the very end.
Mm.
The good place, like being in a good place. I'm
Mhm.
spoiling the shit out of it right now, but it's out there, so I don't care, right? My point is that
Yeah.
this show invited me to do something that in all the years that I was in Scientology and all the years since I left Scientology and I've looked at other religions, no other group or thing has ever invited me to do this. And that is to actually seriously really consider what would life be like if we lived forever?
Mm.
What would an eternal life look like if you shed your mortal coil, right? You're pushing up the daisies, and you go on to some other spiritual place. Well, you're still alive, right? And everybody in the show still has their bodies and all that. So they're in this place, and they finally get around to dealing with this in the fourth season. After all the adventures and misadventures the characters go through, it is probably one of the best shows I have ever seen to discuss morality and critical thinking and skepticism. Their lessons are all throughout. It was the first place I ever learned about the trolley problem. Things like that are presented as part of the plot of the show. It's very cleverly written, but this business of inviting me to really look at how much of eternity could you deal with before you would absolutely positively be out of your mind with boredom. You
Mhm.
know and and I realized that for me looking at it, that as a human being, that we are human. We're not We like to think of ourselves as souls or spirits or whatever. And all those years I was in Scientology, I believed that I had led billions of years of lives, and all this. But then I never really looked at what would that really look like. And once you do, you see that there's really no final destination there that is not 1000% pure torture for you, because the human experience is a very limited experience. And it made me realize that if there's an afterlife which is truly supposed to be a good place, a blissful experience for eternity or something, we're going to have to stop being human to get there. And I just never even had that thought until somebody invited me to really look at it and think about it. And I wanted to throw that out at you because those are the kind of things that I just have a ball with now is somebody presenting ideas to me or inviting me to consider things that I've never thought of before, even if it's the most obvious thing and it's right there in the middle of the room and you should have been thinking about it the whole time, but you just never did. What do you what's your response to that?
Uh, well, my first response is I've been looking for a new show to start. Like all my shows are over. Um, I yeah, I think inherently you would have to stop being human. Um, but I think it's one of those things where if you're looking at your consciousness going on and you're looking at what goes on beyond it, um, it may not actually be boring. Maybe it's not torture because who knows what, like we were talking about, well, we don't know everything. Well, there could be an infinity of things to learn and not know. So maybe it wouldn't be boring. I mean, when I thought of immortality or living forever, I'm thinking like vampirism, right? Or like being a zombie. And I'm like, well, I think eventually that might suck, you know? Getting back to Tom Cruise, if it was Tom Cruise when he's like first, like he's the hot vampire, it's like, okay, I could do that forever, maybe. Brad Pitt's a little more my style. But, then you see and they start, he starts getting all fucked up and it's like, okay, well, this is kind of gross. And then I start wondering, well, if they don't have any blood, can they actually function in every way that I might want a Brad Pitt or a Tom Cruise to function? So, but you do think of immortality in those shows as a very humanistic thing. If I'm just consciousness floating, well, maybe I'm not going to have those physical wants or needs anymore. Maybe things are going to be different. Or there's the idea of consciousness going on and joining the larger consciousness, right? We're all one part of one big energy thing. So, I think it's hard to imagine because there's so much that doesn't. I think it's almost unfathomable. I don't think it's possible to even think in those terms because the possibilities are literally infinite.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So my long story short, I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great. It's just fun ideas. It's just fun ideas,
Oh, sure.
And I fall in the exact same place with God, actually. When if you're going to have a logical discussion with me about God, we're really not going to be having much of a conversation because how could we possibly begin to understand an entity that could create all of this? I mean, where do we even begin to have the gall to think that we're even the slightest bit capable of understanding a creature of such enormous power and immensity and who knows whatever else? I just can't even imagine. To me, it seems that this whole creating, God in man's image is the only choice we've got because we are incapable of conceiving of infinity or eternity or, this ultimate power sort of thing. And for me, the conversation kind of starts and stops right there. It's a very uninteresting conversation to me because of that. Because I'm like, it's like ants talking about whales or something. Like, what are you talking about? How are you possibly gonna have this conversation? It's like asking a fish about that classic thing about how's it feel to be in the water, and the fish goes, "What's water?"
Yeah.
Like, what? There's just you just don't even have the most basic concept of the most obvious parts about it.
I
That's
think the conversation as it relates to God and atheism, personally, I think the question of atheism is really more about, is there a supernatural deity that intervenes in Earth and the universe and in people's personal lives? And I
right.
think that's really, for me personally, that's where I'm like, no, I have not seen that, because if he is, then he's a total jerk.
Right, exactly.
He's not the epitome of morality or ethics. He's an ass. So
Yeah.
I don't, for me, that's where the conversation starts. I can't begin to, and I was talking to somebody about deists, people that think that because there's a lot of people from the Enlightenment and things like that that thought that maybe there was a deity or supernatural or something we don't understand that did kick off the universe, start the Big Bang, or have otherwise somehow create things that we won't, like you're right, we'd never be able to understand that. That conversation ends right there because it's beyond our even imagination because we're confined to our perception on Earth. And as far as I'm concerned with the empirical evidence of a deity interfering in or, playing with our lives, there is no evidence there. And so that's why I would be comfortable calling myself an atheist. But yeah, when it gets to outside of that, and that's one of the reasons why I was looking at quantum physics, astrophysics, and things like that, and the universe and what we know about the universe, because I was actually trying to get a better understanding of what our understanding of what we understand of our world and life goes. But yeah, I agree with you. The conversation pretty much ends there because it's beyond our comprehension. We can't comprehend things. We have no idea beyond what we know.
Yeah, exactly. I do think it's a fun exercise to engage with theists on these things, on the nature of their belief, because I'm curious about what they believe and how they came to those beliefs and why they might have some level of certainty about those beliefs, despite the fact that there's no evidence, right? No definition of faith. So I find that fascinating, mostly from a psychological perspective at this point, and sociological, because I tend to go in that direction a lot. Um, but I find that's where I find it interesting, and I like to engage with people from that point of view. If we can keep it at that kind of level and understand that we're not talking life and death, and at the end of this conversation, I'm not going to hell if I don't agree with you. It doesn't. If we can have a conversation at that level, then I think it can be fun and productive and useful. Even uh, the other ones, nah, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Erin, this has been a really interesting conversation. I'm really glad that I invited you onto my show. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about or might have missed?
I don't think so. I think you've been pretty thorough.
Cool. It's
Yeah.
good because I wanted to, I find you an interesting person. I liked your book. I liked what you had to say. I'll have to check out your other books. I'll put links to these things in the show notes for people to check out. Is there any way for people to reach out to you if they want to contact you directly? Is it through your channel or some other way?
My website, erinlouis.com. Spelling is important because Erin Louis is also the lead singer of Stained. But erinlouis.com has a contact page. Sometimes people will reach me through there. I am, as of now, open to private messages on Facebook and Twitter. That is subject to change if things get weird, but they have not so far, actually, at all. Most people preface this with, I hope you don't mind me messaging you. And I actually don't, unless, like I said, the very rare instances where it has been not okay. So yeah, I'm pretty open as far as being contacted. Everything about me, links to everything is pretty much on my website, erinlouis.com. So I'll give you that link if you want. But yeah, I'm fairly open. Like I said, until that changes. For right now, I'm definitely open and interested in conversations.
Awesome. Well, folks, you'll see the links on all of this down below in the description section on YouTube or at sensiblyspeaking.com. So check it out there. And if you have questions for her, you can send them her way. Once again, Erin, thank you very much. And, maybe we'll do this again sometime.
I hope so. I think I'd like that.
Awesome. I think I would too. Okay, folks. Any questions, comments, or feedback, do leave it in the comments section. And I want to give a big, huge shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome, especially now. I know that it's difficult. Like, I really get it. And your support is awesome and amazing. And if any of you guys out there find my channel and my content interesting, informative, and maybe mildly entertaining, then consider supporting me through that channel or through PayPal. Great for one-offs, send me some love, stuff like that. and the Critical Merchandise site, link below, where you can actually get things and help support this channel. So check that out also. All right, folks, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.